Hi, Internet. Hello, friends. My name is Dominic D'Andrea. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Queens Theater. Thank you so much for joining us for the first session of QT Makes. I'm super excited that you're joining us. And for those of you who are in Queens specifically, we initially had designed this program for you because Queens, as you know, is at the epicenter of everything that's going on. So we thought, what can we do with our visibility as an organization and everybody sheltering in place? And let's just bring some cool folks together and see if we can do some making at home. That noise you hear in the background is my 2-year-old being whisked away upstairs so I can hear myself speak on the Zoom. But this session today is Brad, and then pretty much every Wednesday for the next 4 weeks, we'll be having some really special guests doing some very simple instructional cook along at home kind of things. There are 2 types of folks on this particular, really 3 types. There's panelists and there's attendees. And if you're an attendee, you don't have access to the microphone and the camera. You're watching it on the sideline by design. And if you're a panelist, we will invite you throughout this to keep your cameras off and your microphones off and muted. And along the way, Oliver will stop and invite questions and things like that, and he'll kind of prompt you when to turn it on and off. But by default, just keep it off so we can roll with it. A couple things I want to say before we get started. Number 1, gallery view and speaker view at the top of your screen. Probably many of you have been on Zoom thus far. You can play around with gallery view and with speaker view. Right now we are in speaker view, but we can switch to gallery view. I see somebody is using the chat function, presumably Jay, and there's a chat function along the way and a Q&A function along the way where you can drop in breadcrumb questions that we can kind of pick up. But for this initial run, I would recommend putting this on speaker view. And then later, if we need to switch to gallery view, we'll prompt you to do so. Again, check out the other sessions of QT Makes. We'll be making cake. We'll be making kitchen sink cookies with Marissa Trochel, who was the runner-up on this past season of Great American Baking Show and got some Hollywood handshakes and things like that. She's a very good baker. As well as some QT staffers and myself offering some other tutorials along the way. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to the screen my longtime friend, colleague, Oliver Butler, who, fun fact, many years ago used to work at Queens Theater before he was a big fancy Broadway director / internet baking celebrity. So Oliver, thank you so much for your time and for your generosity, and let's get to it.
Nice. Thanks, Dominic. Awesome to be here, and awesome to be kicking off this whole thing. What an exciting thing. I am in Queens, but I don't really feel like I am anywhere since I haven't left my apartment in a long time. So anyway, it just feels super great to be connected to other people doing something that I love. The structure of this, we're going to be baking bread. Although if you are starting the dough right now with me, you're not going to be baking bread until tomorrow. So some of this is going to be a tutorial about your lives in the future and what you're going to do. And I'm going to take you through the entire process right now through a little bit of food TV magic. The first thing I need to do, though, because the structure of this is weird, because doing this No Knead Bread takes around 24 hours, is actually I want to start by putting a finished dough in the oven. That way, by the end of this, I can take it out and you can watch me eat delicious bread, which sounds like torture, but I think it's probably the best way to learn how to do it. So I'm going to take you through putting the dough, the finished dough, in the oven. I'm going to show you what it looks like. The dough is cooked in a Dutch oven in your oven. I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later on, but right now you're just going to sort of go through the process with me. So 24 hours from now or a day later, you will end up with a dough that looks like this. It's under a tea towel. This is a 2/3 bread flour, 1/3 whole wheat flour dough with cornmeal on what looks like the bottom, but will actually be the top of the dough. This is going to be the bottom because we're going to take this and we're going to invert it into the Dutch oven. Just giving you an idea. When we get back to this, you're going to have to remember I told you this so that you have an idea of why we lay it out like this. So I am going to bring the dough over. Let me flip it back around. I'm a theater director, so I'm not a great camera guy, but I'm going to do my best. Here is my top of my oven. I am going to take the Dutch oven out of the oven. This is piping hot. It's been in the oven at 475 for 30 minutes. So this is super hot. This is the secret to incredible, delicious bread. In a normal bakery, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Let's get it in. So if you can see, I use this tea towel, and I promise you this will all make sense later. I just have to do this now. But I'm using the tea towel to hold the whole thing. And I'm going to flip it. That's why you have the tea towel and why the bottom is the top and the top is the bottom. You will see I'm going to take this, hopefully some action dust flying at you, and I'm going to flip it into the pot. Now, you look at it in there. I need to get it covered up. Shake it around just a little bit to get it centered. Put it back in the oven. Covered. It's important to cover it. I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes. All right. There we go. Oh, I got to show you where I took the camera away from. Cat jumped in. That's Freckles. We started by trying to keep her off of the counter and everything, but at this point, what matters at all? Okay, so that's in the oven. It's cooking for 20 minutes until we take the top off. And I'm sorry I got to do it out of order, but it's a good storytelling method anyway, and we get to end with bread. I'm going to talk a little bit about like why I make bread, and then we're going to take you through the first step. I'll take you through all the additional steps. First thing I'll say is I learned to make bread using the Jim Leahy method. It's a no knead recipe. Bread is like the simplest thing in the world. It is flour, it's water, and it's air. And we add a little bit of salt for flavor. I think one of the reasons I love making bread is that just like sort of philosophically, it feels like I get to make this thing that is absurdly delicious with a minimum amount of ingredients. So it feels sort of elemental. It's also one of these things that if you like understand the basics, the basic ratios, there's unlimited possibilities. You can make bread with olive in it. You can make bread with sweet stuff in it. You can make sourdough. It's very forgiving. I know a lot of people say that baking is like science and chemistry, whereas cooking is a little bit more improvisational. I find bread to be on the improvisational level, especially this no knead recipe. You can get it wrong and it's still pretty good. Someone hopped on early and was asking, they didn't have yeast, and they were saying, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, but they were asking if they could use lemon juice and baking soda. I advised against it, but however, I would totally spend, days trying to figure out like, oh man, what do I do if I'm caught without the right stuff? How do I do that? But it's one reason I love it. Unlimited possibilities. It makes your house smell great. And the last thing I'll say, especially during COVID, we're in this world where like microorganisms are the enemy. We're being sort of like attacked by this thing that we can't see. And one thing I feel sort of empowering about bread making is that, you're using a fungus, yeast, to make something delicious. It's this like microorganism. And the original bread makers, the people who like made bread the first time, my guess is they had a pile of, poorly ground wheat, and it got wet because it rained. And then like 3 days later, they came back and it was all expanded, and then they threw it on a fire and they ate it. I have baked bread in the Dutch oven. I have baked bread without the Dutch oven in the oven. I have baked bread in a Dutch oven on a campfire. You can sort of, like go back to basics, go back to the ancestors and access like sort of some ancient roots and feel connected to something. And in the end, even bad bread is delicious. So anyway, I recommend that you sort of take it, improvise with this. Couple things I'll say. The goals here with making bread: you want a crusty crust, you want a soft, cushiony crumb, right? The crust is the outside. That's where a lot of the flavor is, where the oven sort of cooks it and it like gets a lot of flavor. The crumb is the soft, pillowy inside. You want that to be really sort of soft and velvety and to hold up and full of air, and be nice and soft. You want the top to be brown and delicious. That's where also, it's the crust, but specifically the top has like a lot of flavor in it. And my goal here is I want you to walk away with an understanding of the science and the time and the basics of all of this, so you can just improvise. I don't look at the recipe anymore, right? I sort of go with what I know it to be. The things that you need to do when you're baking bread is you need the protein, and you need the air, and you need the moisture. So the whole goal of rising bread dough is to get the protein out of the flour. The flour is like a sponge, right? It's like a sponge full of gluten, right? And so what you're doing is you're adding the moisture and you're letting it sit in the no knead method for a long period of time, so that all the protein leaches out of the flour and creates this beautiful network, which is what the bread ends up looking like, right? So one goal is get all the protein out of the flour. We do that either through, a traditional bread making method is you take it and you squeeze the protein, right? You knead it so that all the protein comes out and that protein congeals and you have your bread. In the no knead method, you let the moisture sit for a longer period of time so it slowly leaches out. And I like to think of it that it actually, I've been told, I don't know, that it creates a sort of a more delicate and beautiful protein structure, because it like slowly creates, like creating salt crystals or something. You're taking the protein out and slowly it's coming out, and it's the chemistry on a microscopic level is like reorganizing itself into this lattice where you then need to inject the air, right? So if you just left, flour and water out for a while, you would just end up with a big gelatinous like ball of protein. Now, the thing is, there's yeasts in the air. There's microbes in the air that would get into that. And so I was saying to my buddy, and I think he said he was in Michigan, without yeast, you could just mix up a bowl of flour and water and just, sort of see what happens. It might actually, pick up some of the yeasts around, or you'd end up with like a pile of mold and not want to eat it. I am not advocating that you do that. Don't get sick. Wash your hands. Okay, so let's get into, so the yeast part of this, so you create the lattice and then you get the yeast. And what the yeast is this microorganism that eats sugar and gives off gas. So it's this thing that you put into the whole dough that as it eats the sugars in the wheat, in the flour, it releases the gas and it blows the thing up like a balloon. So there you go. Get the protein out of the sponge, and then you got to add air to it, so that when you take that thing that we just put in the oven, you put it in the oven in the heat of the Dutch oven, then the whole thing just blows up, crisps, and you've got delicious bread. Okay, so I'm going to take you through step one, which is making the dough. Very generally, you should have in the chat function, I don't know if Jay or Dominic can just check this, but maybe I can add. Should I add the instructions in the chat function? I just want to make sure that people have the ingredients in front of them.
Yeah,
Hey, Oliver. I'll actually, let me drop up a slate here.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through the ingredients very simply. A dough, with exception, don't blow up my mentions. With exception, a dough is around 2 parts flour, 2 parts solid to 1 part water. Okay, So generally you're doing around twice as much flour as you are water. If it was equal amounts, you'd be dealing with something that looks a little bit more like a batter, right? So the difference between batter and a dough is just that proportion. Now, of course, you can't just like, I got my best friend, Ian, he's someone who reads a recipe and he's like science, you know, going through it. Honestly, day to day humidity changes. You got to know what, you got to know exactly what you're, you know, looking for so that you're like going towards a product, not just following the instructions, but generally half as much water. Also with a no knead recipe, we're using a lot less yeast because it's got more time. If we were kneading it and we're going to bake it today, we need more yeast because it's got to do more of that air work in less time. We're going to let it sit for like 12 to 24 hours. So we use a lot less yeast. Okay, I'm going to take you through making a bowl of your dough. I'm going to flip it around. Okay, I got 3 kinds of dough here, or 3 kinds of flour. You can use any kind of flour that you like. If you look, the King Arthur flour, which I love, I've been to their factory. They put the protein content right on the bag. You notice that the bread flour has slightly more protein than the all-purpose, and the whole wheat has even more protein. Now, more protein doesn't necessarily mean better. More protein, you know, what you're looking for here is like the whole wheat flour is high protein, but it's actually a lot of other like sort of more parts of the wheat as well. The bread flour is very, very soft and really, really great for making bread, but you can use any of these. Okay, we're going to start making this. I am going to use 2 cups of bread flour and 1 cup of whole wheat flour. You can do all-purpose. You can do 3 cups of bread. You can do 3 cups of whole wheat. I find if I use too much whole wheat, it ends up being a denser loaf. So I like doing, for my normal loaf, I do 2 cups of the bread and then 1 cup of the whole wheat, which just ends up being this like crazy, crazy delicious, sort of nutty, but super pillowy bread. So I'm putting 3 cups in the bowl. 2 cups of the bread, 1 cup of the whole wheat. Hope everyone can see me. There we go. I'm assuming you can see me. I can see my little picture, but speak up if for any reason you can't see me. Okay, now we're going to do 1/4 cup of yeast. Now I use the active dry yeast. You can use any kind of yeast in this. I've even used like sort of like the wet baker's yeast that you get in a block. It is super, super forgiving as far as how much, but we're going to use 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, which is a tiny amount. It's like I get, you know, 4 loaves out of one of these like little packets here. So there's 1/4 teaspoon, boom, right in with the dry ingredients. In some recipes, you like wake up the yeast and all that stuff. It's got plenty of time to get going. All right. And then we do 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. Okay. I have this game whenever I'm cooking, which is like use the least amount of utensils as possible. So I use the 1/4 teaspoon and I do sort of here. You're gonna have to stare at my gut, my COVID gut. But I do sort of heaping teaspoons. I do 4 of these. 4 heaping. So that's like, you know, that is about 1 1/4 teaspoons. For me, part of the fun is actually like understanding how it all works and just like rolling with it. I get a whisk, and I like to whisk all the dry ingredients together. I really recommend this because like you got 2 different kinds of flour. You want that all mixed up, and you also want the yeast all the way throughout. So I take the whisk and I get it nice and all mixed up with the salt. Everything is sort of equally distributed. That means that that yeast isn't going to run out of things to eat. You're not going to have a lopsided dough. You want it fully incorporated. All right. I also have, here I'll say, 1 1/4. Okay, for Meredith, it's it's a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast and 1 1/4 teaspoon of salt. All right, 1/4 teaspoon yeast, 1 1/4 teaspoon salt. If you're using a starter, I would use a 1/4 cup of starter back when I had my starter. So, but again, flexible. If a starter has like less actual yeast in it per size, so I just end up using more. The other thing is, I'll say that like part of what's great about this no knead recipe is that the amount of time it spends, it actually picks up microbes in the air, which again, in the age of COVID sounds frightening, but for bread making, it's incredible. It means that like all the different things like beer making that are in the air get into the bread and then end up adding to the flavor. And even if some COVID makes it in there, it gets killed in the oven. So, and maybe COVID's delicious. We don't know. We don't know. Don't try it though. Don't try it. Okay, I am now going to mix this up. I'm going to try and give you a good view of this so that you can see. My goal, again, one of the games I play with myself when I am cooking, my goal is to try and spill the least amount of flour. I put 1.5 cups of water, but you add it little by little, all right? The difference between not enough water and too much water is honestly drops. So you got to stop when it's ready. The other thing I'll say, I don't know if this is totally true or not. I think our water is fluorinated, and I think it's bad on the yeast. Like it sort of kills some of the yeast. May or may not be true, but I take my water out 30 minutes ahead of time. I pour it and I let it sit, and apparently the fluorine evaporates. But I don't know. Who knows if that's true? Okay, so now I am going to pour it in. Oh, here, maybe I can like action shot. Oh, look at that action shot. Come on. That is good. Okay. And you're going to watch. I'm going to do it sort of pasta style. I'm going to start by adding some in the middle. And I slowly work it in. Part of this is just to make sure that we evenly distribute all the water, you know, as it gets in. This is going to be, you are literally going to watch me stir dough. And really in the end, seeing the completed thing is what's, I just spilled some off the side. Fail, but you got an action shot of that. You will be cleaning up flour. You will actually know everything you need to know about gluten by cleaning up, because you will be cleaning flour up for forever. There'll be sort of a somewhat gritty film on everything, but it's worth it in the end. I use the rubber spatula as well, because another game I try and play is have the least amount of unused flour on anything, basically incorporate every bit of the flour. You see you get a lot of dry stuff in the bottom. I'm gonna add some more flour there. Now this looks super, super dry, right? But I just warn you that I have gone from too little to too much in one stroke. And that's not such a big deal. You just add some more flour until you get it to the consistency that you want. And what you're going for is you want a dough that has no, there should be no unincorporated flour, so no dry flour. If there is dry flour now, you are going to end up with a big glob of dry flour. When you cut into your bread, there's literally going to be like, I feel like it's going to be like from the movie The Mummy, where like you open up the sarcophagus and like all this dry flour starts like pouring out. It's a sad thing. It doesn't ruin, again, very flexible. It doesn't ruin it, but you don't want, see, I still got a little bit on the bottom there.
Now I'm just going to add a few drops. That might have even been too much, right? I want a fully incorporated dough. I want it to be sort of shaggy. Shaggy meaning you can sort of see the crags, right, of the whole thing.
Oliver, we have a question from the audience. Is there a
Please.
specific amount of water that is recommended here?
Yeah, so it should be in the list of ingredients, but it's half as much as the flour. So I did 3 cups of flour, so you should be doing 1.5 cups of water. That's sort of what I put together, but it's going to be less than that, right? I would go lighter. The official Jim Leahy recipe says 1 1/3 cups, but that's just not enough for me. Like I can't incorporate all the flour. Water, the warmth of the water, you don't have to worry so much about it. Again, with this method, the time sort of smooths everything out. So cold water is fine. I try and use like room temperature. It's probably good that it should not be hot because it'll, can't be boiling water because it'll kill the yeast. If it's cold, it'll just be slower to start. But, you're mixing it in with all the flour here. So it's, okay. So now I'll say I may have added just a little bit too much. If you can see, it's like a little bit shiny. I'm going to leave it, but I will say, just so that, what you're doing at home, this is on the wetter side. After the first rise, I'm going to have another chance to add a little bit of flour and change its consistency. If you can sort of time warp back in time, to the dough that we put in the oven, you remember it was sort of fully pulled together. I will show you what it ends up wanting to look like. But this is pretty good. It's all incorporated. I don't see any dry stuff, a little bit on the sides. Okay, now I am going to saran wrap that. Give me 1 second. We're going to saran wrap that. And that was the timer in the oven going off for our bread. For me to take the top off. No one let me forget that. Okay, I saran wrap it, and then I write the time. Right? I write the time on there. Now, before I put that away, I'm going to take the top off the bread in the oven. I want you to watch this. So again, you're sort of teleporting to when you're going to be cooking the bread. All right. So we have just made this dough right here. Okay. Now you're teleporting into the future to 20 minutes into the bake. I am going to take a look, turn off the timer, into the furnace. We're going to take a look at this now. Ooh, a lot of steam. All right, great. So look at this. This looks gorgeous. I just want you to remember that in your mind. Okay, it's sort of a light thing. I did some cornmeal on the outside, but it's not browned up yet. All right. Now it's got all the rise it's going to get, but now we need to add the brown. So that's 20 minutes. Now I'm going to set the timer for another 15. All right. And we're going to let it get brown. And we'll check it at 15 and see if it's enough. I like just brown. Some people like it nice and black. Again, it's very, very flexible. There was one time I put that dough in there without the top on and cooked the whole thing without the top. And it was still a good loaf. The crust was too thick, but we ate it and it was crazy delicious. So don't be afraid. Okay, so now we are going to teleport back to, we have just finished mixing up our dough. All right, it is 1:30. And now this needs to go away for 12 to 24 hours. Again, very flexible. You're just going to let it sit out covered. You could cover it in a tea towel. I cover it in plastic. And I am going to now leave this for, here, I'll give you cat cam while we do it. I am going to
put it away for 24 hours. And now magic. It's in a different bowl too, because I don't have matching bowls. Check it out. That is what it looks like after 12 to 24 hours. Look at that thing. Those, you know what? I can't just do it. I just want you to look at the difference, okay? That's one. That's 24 hours later, right? You see? That dry, sort of shaggy dough turns into that glorious thing, okay? Now, just so you know what the two things look like. I am now going to turn out, so let me put this guy back up. Magic. And we're going to go through the, the most like skill-based version of this here. Again, show you, see that in there? It's sort of a soupy, bubbly, I mean, look at this thing. Now, I bet there are bakers out there who could tell me what would happen if we just took this and dumped it in the oven. I'm not sure. I have a feeling it would be too airy and it would sort of like fall apart. It wouldn't hold together. We still need to make this into a dough, and it goes for a second rise. So we're 24 hours later. I'm going to take you through here are the steps. So if you don't mind making a big mess, I do stuff on cutting boards so that I got like a little bit less to clean up. I think I get that from my father. My father was always like a clean as you go kind of guy. So I picked a little bit up from him. So anyway, I turn it out onto a plate. What we're trying to do, if you remember the thing we put in the oven, it ended up on a tea towel, right? What I'm trying to do is I'm turning that bowl of mush into a dough that's going to rise for another 2 hours. Okay, so here we go. I have a floured surface. Boom, floured surface. Now watch this. I love the rubber spatula. Let me raise it up a little bit so you can see the magic. Yeah, there we go. And I try and get it out all in one. Again, this is the game. Get it out all in one swoop so you don't break the dough. All right, that's that rubber spatula cutting through. Also makes it easier to clean up. Now, we got this ball of dough right here, right? And I prep a second location. I'm going to show you. Hold on one second. This is where the dough is going to go after the fact for the second rise. Okay, so I got this dough here. Now I'm going to prep another spot with the tea towel. You put the tea towel down. I take a little bit of flour, and this is where you can get creative, right? You take some flour because you don't want it to stick to the tea towel. And I set the flour down, right? Set it all down. Boom. Look at that. Right? I sometimes too, because the bottom is the top and the top is the bottom, when we put it on here, I got cornmeal, I got oat bran. If I put this down here, this is what's going to be on top of the dough. See that? A little bit there. And why not? What the heck? I'm going to do a little oat bran as well. Why not? I've never done two. Whatever you like on top and stuff that isn't going to like get scorched in the oven, you can put whatever you like down. Okay, so this is your target. This is where that's going to go. This is the dough that we now need to make into a ball. And you're sort of making like a hat. I take a little bit of flour just for my hands, right? Flour up my hands. Let me lift it up a little. I flour up my hands, okay? And I start folding it in on itself like this, okay? What you're trying to do is you're trying to sort of create a ball. All right. And look, it started sticking already. Now, it's starting to stick to my hand. But you see how I flipped it over and now the seam is on the bottom. Okay. There's a little bit of the like technique that you're doing. What you're doing is you're trying to create without knocking all the air out of it, right? I'm not trying to like handle and destroy all the air in it, but I'm trying to like, so the seam is on the bottom, which ends up being the top. Okay. Create this beautiful stretched ball. All right. Then I set it down here. I put a little bit of flour on top just so it doesn't stick to the other side. Okay, see that? Boom. And then we cover it up. We let it go to sleep for a little while. I take it, put it up on a shelf next to a cat optional. You don't have to set it next to cat. I set it up there. I let it sleep for 2 hours. Now, here's, the most complicated part of the math. That's ready to cook in 2 hours, but it needs to go into a hot oven with a hot Dutch oven. That needs about 30 minutes to get hot. So 30 minutes before that's done, all right? So I'm gonna set a timer for 90 minutes. I just put the dough up there. I'm gonna set a timer for 90 minutes. This is fun. I'm sure this whole YouTube channel is just people setting timers, right? But this is 90 minutes. Boom. Press time. Boom. All right, there we go. 90 minutes. So that means in 90 minutes, I would turn the oven on and put the Dutch oven inside, top, bottom, the whole thing. Rack is sort of on the like bottom third. That heats up for half an hour. Set another timer for half an hour. When that's ready, you take that dough and you do the part that I did at the beginning of the tutorial, which is take that, put your hand underneath the tea towel, flip the thing over into the Dutch oven, cover it up, put it in, and you start your 20-minute timer there. So I have now done it, and we are, all right, we're 5 minutes from eating bread from that first dough that I put in. So I am going to maybe take some questions, and if people want to show me, if anyone who's watching made a dough, you want to show me your dough, I can give you dough feedback. I am a director, but I'm a pretty nice guy. So I will, I worked with an actress recently who said, I like a compliment sandwich, which I appreciate that. So I will give you 2 delicious slices of compliments with a little feedback stuck in the middle. So in 5 minutes we'll have bread. Anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do. After you make the ball, do you put the top down on the tea towel or the bottom, or it doesn't matter? So
you want to put the bottom down because, okay, it's all about sort of what's top and what's bottom. The seam in the end is going to be up in the Dutch oven. So here, I'm going to show you. Sorry, you're going to have to look straight at my, okay. If this was the dough, right? I'm taking everything and I'm rolling it under, right?
Yes.
Like this. So the seam is on the bottom, right?
Yes.
And then I'm taking this and I'm setting it down on the tea towel like this.
Okay.
That is so when I take it and put it in the Dutch oven,
it flips.
I'm going to hold it like this and I'm going to flip it into the Dutch oven like that.
Okay.
And you will see when we take that out of the oven, I sort of think it's like the fingerprints of a bread loaf, right? No two are the same. You end up with that crackly, beautiful, like I've had
I've had some that like look like horses running, and I don't know, when we look at this one, we can see what it looks like, but it ends up being its own design. But yeah, for that second rise, you tuck it underneath like a hat, and you place the hat down the way you have it, and then hands under the tea towel, and boom, in the Dutch oven, and that's up on top.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. You got it. If you did it the other way, you I don't think thered be any problem. It might not hold together as well.
It might open up.
Yeah, it might open up. I will show you though. I was re-looking at the Jim Leahy cookbook, which, by the way, I learned this from watching and reading the Jim Leahy's Sullivan Street Bakery cookbook. Here, I'm going to show you. Okay, I'm going to show you. I mean, this is a real master. Look, this is. Look at the like gloopy mess of that dough. That's right before he puts it in the oven. So like I showed you how to make like a very sort of like compact, I think like beautiful dough, right? But look, that's him. This is the pro putting it in the oven, dumping it into the crock pot, into the Dutch oven. You know what I mean? So I will tell you, you do this 3 times and then you can host your own. You're going to be able to host your own Q&A about all the best practices, because you do it. And who knows, depending on where you live, I mean, if you're in Queens, you got similar, weather as me here, but like different altitude, different humidity, different temperature, you're going to find that the thing just like looks and tastes and is different. Yeah.
Oliver, we've got a question from the audience. This is from Matt. It has been answered in the chat. However, let's put it on video. The question is, what temperature should the oven be set to for the baking?
475. And again, 475, again, you sort of, ovens are all different, but I have a gas oven, an okay gas oven. An electric oven can be very different. So 475, really you want it real hot. I cook pizza in this oven at 500. A real pizza oven is like 800. I don't know what temperature a real bread oven is, but you want it real hot. So 475 is what I do with mine, and that has worked pretty well.
Hey, Oliver, it's Dominic. Do you want to check out my B- bread?
Yeah, buddy. Show off your bread.
All right. So I did one yesterday in preparation. I probably should have baked it 5 minutes longer, a little pale, but I just wanted to try a technique, and it came out looking like this.
Nice.
And I put Trader Joe's everything bagel seasoning on it, and it started to kind of burn up when I took the lid off, which is why I pulled it out of the oven early. I won't be doing that again. But as you can see, the seam on the top from where I folded it, kind of jazz, not really like.
Well, I don't know. Turn it a little bit. Let's see it from all sides. Let's see the top from all sides. Maybe we can decipher what it means. I see a crane. I sort of see there's like a flying bird actually where your left hand is. Yes. I think it's like the feet. Yeah. That's that flying bird bread, bro. Yeah, the flying bird everything bread.
Yeah, it's pretty. You can hear the knock
nice
a little bit.
Yeah,
but not as much as it would be if I.
No, I think it's great. Actually, the question about like what to put on top, some things burn. I bet if you mix that stuff with some flour or some cornmeal that doesn't burn, that might actually help quite a bit. But I think, yeah, great. I would go a little bit longer, but that is pretty good. Okay, we just beeped, and now I want to show you. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. Oh, look at that. Okay, we are going to let it go just a little bit longer in case there are any other questions. And if there are no other questions, then I'm going to take that out. Does anyone have anything else they want to know?
I'd also just like to let everybody know that we do have the capacity and the capability to open some mics in the audience. So if you'd like to speak your question directly to Oliver rather than chatting it through, just use the raise hand functionality and we'll get to you.
Excuse me, can you give us a time again for how
Sure.
long in the oven?
Sure. Here's what I do, and then I would say I do 20 minutes with the lid on and 15 minutes with the lid off, or until it looks the way I want it to look.
Okay.
I will tell you, again, as with everything I've said here, it's sort of to your discretion, because the Jim Leahy cookbook, I think, says something like 30 minutes with the lid on and 10 minutes with the lid off. So I'll just tell you, this is what I've decided is good for me. 20 minutes lid on, 15 minutes lid off. And honestly, sometimes it adjusts. In the end, though, as long as you get like at least 20 minutes with the lid on, you just cook it with the lid off until it looks right.
Okay.
I saw someone else asked a question.
We do have an audience question here from Kala. Is there a good place to put your bread, or a place that is most effective?
Yeah. So if you don't eat it all in one sitting, I'm assuming, which I've done on multiple occasions. I made beer for a while, by the way, and the problem was I drank just way too much beer. And the same thing with bread. If I make bread, I eat the whole thing. I recommend, so the bread is most delicious when it first comes out and before you cut it. You can leave it out for most of the day you bake it. If you don't cut into it, you can just leave it out. And even if you do, you can just leave it out. Overnight, I recommend wrapping it in plastic. I put it in a Ziploc bag. You lose some of the crustiness on the crust, but it will maintain its sort of like overall deliciousness for much longer. So I would recommend, yeah.
It's Dominic here. I cut the loaf up
Oh yeah,
cross section.
that is gorgeous.
Only one air pocket really, and one.
I sort of love. You know what? I'm sure that there's some bread, perfect. That is awesome, buddy. That is awesome. You toast that. That is perfect. I gotta say, like, imperfections for me are just like perfect. I love it. I love it when, I cut into the bread. There's a big air pocket. I put butter on it. The butter goes through. It gets on my hand. It's like, I sort of feel like that's, it's just character, the whole thing.
We've got a question from Tracy Starin. Can you add things to the dough like nuts or dried fruit or olives?
Yes, you absolutely can. So here's the basic deal. You want to make sure that you keep a similar sort of dry to wet ratio. So if you're going to add things that have like oil or water in them, like olives, right? I would squeeze out as much of the liquid as possible, because otherwise then you're just going to have sort of like a wet pocket in the middle of the bread. And I would put it in at the very beginning. Like I would mix up along with the dry ingredients. I would put in all that stuff then, and then add the water and then let it sit for the 12 to 24 hours. I would go with dry ingredients are good. So like I've made olive breads. It's better when you squeeze out as much of the liquid. If you're going to put in fruit like cranberry or something, use like really dried stuff. I think some people might recommend doing it for the second rise, like mixing it in then, but I feel like then you have to like knock all the air out of the package. So you just have to like then hold back on the liquid, right? Because if you're putting stuff in that has any liquid in it, you want to hold back on the liquid. And I think there's like a limit to how much you can put in. It's just like, how much can the house hold, right? You've created this lattice structure. If you put a bunch of like heavy, wet things in there, it's going to make the whole thing collapse. So I would guess a quarter cup to a half a cup of other ingredients is what you can get away with. Or maybe, I don't know, would that be like 1/6 of your total bread flour content is what you could get away with. But yes, you can. You can put, you could put cheese in that thing. You want to put anything in there that isn't going to go bad over a day of staying out. But there's nothing I can think of like a hard Parmesan cheese, any sort of meat, like a cured meat or cranberries or olives. Hey, I'm going to take this out. All right, look at that. All right, can I one hand this? Yes, I can. Okay.
we are taking this puppy out. And I'm just going to show you this, even though we're going to cut into this. It's good to let this cool off on a rack. I have this strainer, which I only use for bread now. Another one of your great, you know, the things you will have to figure out how to do is how do you get this bread out? Look at that thing. I will take I use some tongs. I just knock it off just a little bit without breaking anything. Be nice and careful. I bring it over. I turn off the oven, safety first. Now, we aren't going to have enough time to fully wait for this, but if we were really quiet, we would start hearing the bread sing. What it does is as it cools, the crust starts sort of coming together and it starts crackling, crickling, and creaking almost like a frozen lake. And it is glorious. But I'll just give you a full, or I don't know, you can tell me, I guess it looks a little bit, maybe all I see is birds or maybe a bear. Is that a bear? What is that? Right? That is some sort of a bird or a bear. Is that a head? That's a bear. Bear? Wombat? Anybody? Anyway, that is a glorious looking bread. That is a cornmeal crust. Now I'm going to take this because what kind of cooking show doesn't let you actually vicariously taste this stuff?
Oliver, while you're doing that, just a quick question. Is that first rise in the refrigerator or on a shelf?
No, outside. It should be in your kitchen. If you did it in the refrigerator, the yeast is like a living organism that lives in our world. So you sort of want it to be at a temperature that would make you comfortable. 70 degrees is like great. Just your apartment is great. So you leave it out in the apartment. All the rises happen in a room temperature or even a touch warmer kind of environment. Yeah. Now we're going to get into the good stuff. Okay. This cutting board, by the way, I was a carpenter for years. This is made from reclaimed, Kala, it could be an armadillo. You're right. I have not spent a lot of time with the armadillos. So I'm a Northeasterner. So of course I see bear, but you're absolutely right. That could very well be an armadillo. Look at it's got the hard edge there and it's living, I don't know, it's living in some sort of a dusty wasteland there. This is wood from the Coney Island Boardwalk. This is Purple Heart. It's reclaimed from, beams that were used in the original Coney Island Boardwalk, and I made it into a cutting board, which I then gave to my now wife when she was my girlfriend. And then we ended up living together and getting married, and so now it's mine again. So pro tip. Okay, I'm going to show you how to cut this thing. Now, I have a pretty good Forstner bread knife. This is a gift from my wife to me. The key is you don't want to crush the crumb. So I usually cut it down like this. You hear that thing? Ooh. I would normally let this cool off for like an hour. Whoa, steam cam, come on. Look at that huge bubble there. I'm so glad I didn't bust your butt, Dominic, on internal bubbles there. I will say, just for the record, this is an absurd amount of bubble in the middle. Although, I mean, it's glorious. It's beautiful. Okay, so I cut it in half like that. And then what I do is I cut it like this. I just find I don't crush the crumb when I do it that way. If I cut like this, I'm gonna crush the crumb, right? So instead, and listen, Paul Hollywood, be psyched. Listen to that. It's beautiful. Careful, don't cut yourself. Ooh, almost too hot, almost crushing the crumb. All right, look at that. Now, the reason that we do it
You got some really good butter here. I leave the butter out, so it just, you know, come on, we got to live inside, live it up. Get the best butter you can afford, although even bad butter is good butter. Look at that thing. Let it seep in there a little bit. And then, I wish you were here. It's amazing. Crunchy, right? It pops. It's like the perfect crispy, crunchy cracker. Like the most delicious saltine you've ever had, right? With the softest, pillowiest, butteriest inside. It's actually just like a total beautiful flavor profile. It takes bread from this thing that's just sort of a vehicle for other stuff. And it, yeah, it's just some of the most amazing thing. And I will now, because of doing this video, I'm gonna have 3 loaves of bread in 2 days, which I don't advise, but you know. Anyway, other questions? You can also ask questions. If there's anything you want to know, if there's other theater people here, people who have, I don't know, seen any plays before the dark times.
I made a sandwich while you were doing that, and it holds up, I must say.
You know what? I will. We can fight on this. I don't know that we need to, but I pose that the bread is the most important part of the sandwich. My thinking here is like, if you have great bread and mediocre ingredients, that's a pretty good sandwich. If you have bad bread and great ingredients, like I'll just take the ingredients out and eat them separate, right? That's not a sandwich anymore.
For me,
yeah.
For me, it's about balance.
Totally.
It's like pizza. It has to have the right filling to bread to thing ratio.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, it's kind of a non-starter.
Totally. I made pizza recently, and I like strayed away from my usual recipe. Like I was trying to like use a can of tomatoes I had in the, you know, and I sort of screwed it up. It was still fine, you know, we ate it, but I actually had nightmares that night about, I was so disappointed. I mean, I guess the things we prioritize when we're in quarantine are a little bit different, but I had a short nightmare and a sort of self-flagellating guilt nightmare about screwing up pizza.
Well, it doesn't look like a lot of questions are rolling in, but
We did it.
do you have just tips on things? I mean, I know you said if you use olives or something oil-based, like obviously wipe it off, but are there things that are to put on it or in it that you found are more delicious or less delicious?
Nuts. I think nuts are great. Ground nuts, you know, you can do on the outside, you can do inside. Dried fruit is good as long as you don't use too much. I mean, you're not making a fruit cake, you know, you're not making like a holiday fruit bread. But I would, cornmeal is great. I mean, it's like all this stuff that you don't think of. If you think it's like boring health crap, it's probably delicious on bread. So like wheat bran, oat bran, cornmeal, oatmeal, you know, I put oatmeal in bread as well. And, you know, it ends up creating sort of like an oaty flavor. So having like oat on the outside. Seeds and nuts are great. I'm gonna see if I have other stuff in here. Yeah, but that's my recommendation. It should just be dried fruits and olives and herbs. Rosemary is just like bonkers delicious in a bread. And you can experiment too. You could throw a little bit of oil, like if you want to put olive oil in the original dough, you can do that. It'll make sort of I don't know, sometimes a flatter bread, but like a little bit more lush. Yeah.
And what about alternate pans if you don't have a Dutch oven? Are there good
Oh, yeah.
substitutes?
So the key with the Dutch oven, right? I don't think I actually went into this, is a professional bread oven, like at a bakery, they have humidifiers in the ovens. So they create sort of this like a moist environment that the bread cooks in. And that's what makes the crust so amazing. That's why you end up with the crust. So if you have a different kind of pot, like if I could fit, you know, it has to be able to go in the oven. If I could fit that in my oven, I could use that with the top that comes with it, right? It'll be way at the bottom. Heat that thing up, put it in there and let it cook in that, because it'll create the environment. I've got another pumpkin shaped Dutch oven. I could absolutely make a bread in that. You could also do, you know, I will say, even if you had to do like a Pyrex or something, then what I would say is I would wrap it over the top with aluminum foil. And what some people do is they take like a spray bottle, and a few times during the original bake, you open it up and you quickly spray, or you put a dish of water into the oven so that it's in there boiling sort of underneath the thing if you're not going to cover the thing up, so that you end up with like a steamy environment in there for the crust to form.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and I would also just like to extend the opportunity for these people to come on and ask the questions themselves. Jonathan, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question live, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, in about 5 seconds, I'll read it for you.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Perfect, yes. So I am the guy in Milwaukee that can't find yeast anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I was asking earlier before this all started, what kind of alternatives? So I looked up potato yeast recipes, starter packs. And so you were saying earlier about putting more of a starter into a mix because it's less concentrated?
Yeah, that I had a starter for a long time, and I would make these breads all the time, and it was amazing. I would do a quarter cup of starter.
Quarter, okay. And then you use that instead of the water?
No, instead of the yeast.
Okay.
You still use the water, but again, what you have to do is then you probably use less water.
Okay.
Because the starter adds liquid.
Yes.
You know, what I would do is I would take a starter, right? I would add, you know, half a cup of water to it to make it really liquidy.
Okay.
And then I would add that to the flour, to all the dry ingredients, the salt and the flour minus the yeast. And then I would start turning that into the dough. And then I would just add water as needed to get to where we need.
Gotcha.
You know?
Yeah. No, it's going to be a fun adventure, I think.
I would love to hear what happens. I mean, I have never made a starter completely from potatoes, like the potato starter. I made it from instant yeast, and then I just sort of kept feeding it. But to me, it feels like total, you know, like beautiful evil magic.
There's two recipes I found, and one is potato and water. And just let that sit. And then there's another recipe I found that said potato water, flour, and sugar. And that also could be a thing. So we're going to do both because I've got time.
And the glorious part of that is you are just like creating a trap for your natural microbes in the world to, you know, start a colony in your potato water. And if that doesn't sound delicious, starting a colony of microbes, then I don't know what is. You know, I can't help you.
I'll let you know how it works out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like we could have a whole. There is a guy named Brad Leone on Bon Appetit who has a show called It's Alive, which I highly recommend. All he does is like, you know, sort of any sort of. He does like kimchi's and starter, like any sort of microorganism, like sort of living food stuff. He does a whole thing on it. So I feel like we could have our own show that was just like a survival show where you're like, you got to bake bread. You're on an island, and how are you going to do it? So I cannot wait to hear how it goes.
Hey, sorry, we're quickly running out of time. There are two more questions from folks in the chat. One is about fresh yeast. If you have fresh yeast, would you add the same amount, a quarter of a teaspoon? And the other question is about if you're adding nuts or olives, when in the process do you incorporate that in the dough?
Yeah, so I had used fresh yeast before, and I didn't know how much to use. So I did what looked like a pat of butters, or 2 pats of butter. So like 2 tablespoons of the fresh yeast. It worked absolutely fine. You have a lot of flexibility. So I did 2 tablespoons. I think you could play with it. There is enough time. So like if you're going to use the fresh yeast, I would also dissolve it in water, because you just don't want all the yeast stuck in one part of the dough. So just making sure that it's like spread out in the water, mix it in a cup of water, add that, and then add water as needed. Nuts and olives, I add them in the initial mix. So they're in there the entire time. I think other people recommend adding nuts and olives for the second rise. I just don't like knocking all the air out of the dough. Like I try and handle it as little as possible there. So I recommend doing it, right at the very beginning.
All right. If there's no other questions, I think we have to move towards wrapping it up. But if there are anybody else has anything to ask, if you're baking along at home and want to go on screen and just show a picture of what you mixed up while we're doing this, or if you have any other just wild imagination questions, feel free to pose them.
You can find me on Facebook super easy. If you send me a message, I will happily respond to any bread-based questions or trolling. Any bread trolling, I will receive.
Well, Oliver, thank you so much for your time. This is just awesome. Like I learned a ton today, and
I'm so glad. Everyone should know how to make some bread, right?
Yeah, and we were not only were we here with the attendees and the panelists, but we were also broadcasting on our Facebook Live. So untold numbers of people watching there.
Nice.
We captured. But thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. We're all in this together, and certainly learning a new skill or improving a skill during this time is just something that we can take with us at this time and beyond. Folks, wherever you are, if you're in Queens or if you're in Milwaukee or you're in Minneapolis, I know Meredith's on there, and wherever you are in the country or the world, I hope that you are safe, that you are healthy, that you have everything that you need, that you are in good spirits. We see you, we love you, and we hope that we can all be together in real life soon. But if not, this is a beautiful opportunity to connect, and we'll be doing this every Wednesday for the next 5 weeks, and digital story circles at Queens Theatre Fridays at 1 p.m., which is just a chance to come on camera and share like a minute long story or response from like where you are. I think this week we're actually talking about what are we eating or what are we cooking right now. So just to spark a little bit of joy and understanding from wherever we are. But thank you so much for everything, folks. And Oliver, again, awesome instruction. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
See you next time.